Hello everyone, it's time for another Marvel Select action figure review, and this week I'll be turning my attention to the recently released Red Hulk. I was a big fan of this character when he first premiered in the comic books, and I think it's great that he's getting the Marvel Select treatment in this oversized format. And whilst this isn't the first Red Hulk figure ever to be made, in fact it's not even the first Marvel Select Red Hulk figure to be released, I would say this is possibly the best on the market so far. So let's start off by taking a look at the packaging. Of course, by now we're all very familiar with the Marvel Select packaging. It is this giant oversized packaging, it's quite wide. The plastic blister is mostly window display to really show off the figure, and this figure fits very comfortably inside this oversized packaging because he is so massive and so heavy. But there is this border around the edges that's made of card as well, and we can see behind the images and around the text there's actually this collage of comic book images featuring the Red Hulk. Now, whilst the packaging is still oversized, it's actually quite narrow on the side panel. Traditionally, this is usually double the width that we can see here. This is slimmed down significantly, and this seems to be the way that Diamond Select are going, and I think that's a wise decision. Sometimes they don't justify having that extra wide, thick panel. Even a character like the Red Hulk fits very comfortably in this blister, and we don't need to use all that space. And this is definitely good news for collectors like myself who might want to put these on their shelf and put them on the side, because we can stack these up and we can get a few more to the shelf when they're a little bit thinner like this. Now, interestingly, the image they've gone for, of course, is that Ed McGuinness image. This is perfectly appropriate. This is one of the first artists to tackle this character, so I think this is a really evocative image. It works really well. It is, funnily enough, the same image that was used on the previous release. However, this is a little bit more zoomed out, whereas that was much more focused on the headshot. And then if we flip the packaging and look at the back again, we can see that collage in the background of various moments from Red Hulk's history. We have a little bit of bio on the right hand side, but most of this packaging is given over to a photo of the figure itself, which looks really impressive. It looks very attractive. You could put this on display if you want, and it looks really nice. Okay, so first things first, let's address the elephants in the room. This is essentially a re-release, a repaint of the Immortal Hulk figure, but with a brand new head sculpt. And speaking of the head sculpt, let's take a closer look at this. I have to say, I think they've done an absolutely tremendous job with this. They've definitely caught that likeness as portrayed by Ed McGuinness. I think this looks absolutely tremendous. This definitely caught the attitude of the Red Hulk. It's got the aggression, it's got the arrogance, it's just got all of that perfectly contained. I really love the detailing, the paint apps. You can see there's actually a number of different washes running through this. The detailing around the teeth, the yellow of the eyes, the darkening around the eyes. The hair, all of this looks absolutely fantastic. Now, the actual body sculpt itself, as I said, has been reused from the Immortal Hulk, and I actually think that's perfectly legitimate because obviously this is just a red version of the same character. It's a very easy one for Diamond Select to reproduce, but it's pretty authentic, it's pretty in line with what we see in the comic books. And to be fair, if you're going to recycle one of your sculpts, then the Immortal Hulk is the way to go because that was such a fantastic sculpt, and once again we're seeing really nice paint apps on this figure as well as we saw previously. So this is a great figure all around. I don't really have much to say. There's nothing really new here except the colour scheme is different, except that this time his toenails and his fingernails are obviously painted in, and that seems to be the only real difference. But otherwise this is a fantastic sculpt, really nice paint apps, and very authentic to what we see on the comic book page. Looking at articulation then, he does have a ball joint in the top of the head there, so he can move his head from side to side, he can wiggle it left and right, and he can nod it up and down as well. And there's actually plenty of wriggle room here, which is really nice to see. Now he does have these big ball joints in his shoulders, so he can lift his arms all the way up and out. There is a complementary bicep swivel there as well, and there is a single joint at the elbow that allows the lower arm to lift up to about 90 degrees, and this is quite a chunky, thick joint and quite stiff. Now he does also have a pin swivel at the wrist, so he can rotate that hand all the way around, and of course that hinges forwards and backwards as well. Now he has 2 points of articulation in the torso. He has an upper ball joint in the chest area, which allows him to move from side to side, lean left and right a little bit, and bend forwards and backwards. But there's also this straight swivel at the waist. Now mine is very, very stiff. It was the same on the Immortal Hulk, but it is there if you can get it to work. Of course, he can bend forwards and backwards a little bit. There's the ball joint in the hips, allowing the legs to kick out to the side. There's another complementary thigh swivel at the top there, so you can move that leg around. He can kick the leg forwards a little bit, a tiny bit backwards, and and there's actually a double joint at the knee, although to be fair, you're not really going to be able to get that lower leg much further than 90 degrees. And then finally, there is a pivot at the ankle, so you can hinge that foot forwards and backwards, but it'll also slide from left to right as well. Now, when it comes to accessories, I must admit to feeling slightly disappointed. All we get is this extra pair of open hands. This is all well and good, these are very nice to have, and as we can see on screen, it can create some dynamic poses, which is really cool, and it creates some different looks for the character, which is absolutely fantastic. My issue really comes from the fact that this is identical to what we got with the Immortal Hulk, except with the Immortal Hulk, we also got an alternate head sculpt as well, whereas with the Red Hulk, sadly, this extra pair of hands is all we get. Now, being a Hulk, and in particular the Red Hulk, it's not like I would expect to have a lot of extra accessories, but an alternate head sculpt, maybe a scowling head sculpt, a serious head sculpt, that would have been pretty cool. It would have been a little bit different. But what about that big chunky gun that he has in the early serial? That would have been really, really fun. Something like that, just thinking outside the box, just giving us something a little bit extra, since most of this figure is essentially recycled anyway. It would have been nice to have something new here. So I've talked a lot about the Immortal Hulk figure, so it's only fair that I put these two figures side by side so you can get a proper comparison between the two. As you can see, they are the same figure, so when it comes to scaling, they're pretty much even height, even breadth, and they look pretty good together, I have to be honest. Again, the paint apps are pretty much pitch perfect. This looks really, really good. They should be evenly matched, and yeah, I think they've done a really nice job. So even though it is the same mold, these still look distinctly very, very different, and it works an absolute treat. These look great facing off against each other, and I've had tremendous fun just putting these in various fighting poses, and I think they make a fantastic couplet. So I'm absolutely delighted with this. I was such a huge fan of the Immortal Hulk figure anyway, and I think this Red Hulk just nicely capitalizes on the success of that previous release, and just, adds something, another dimension to the figure, which is absolutely brilliant. Now, at the top of the video, I did mention that Marvel Select had released a Red Hulk previously. Again, that was a repaint of an existing Hulk figure, and they did the exact same thing. They just gave it a brand new head sculpt with a different paint scheme. But as you can see, I have to say, when I first got this Red Hulk, I was immensely pleased. I thought this was a fantastic figure, and I was absolutely delighted to own this in my collection. But now that we have this new Red Hulk, wow, it's like night and day. The original Red Hulk release just seems really clumsy, inept, and all gangly and out of proportion. It just looks wrong. And this new one just looks infinitely better, and I think you'd be hard pushed to argue that the original release is actually better than this new one. The dimensions alone are just much more in proportion. They just look a lot more comic book accurate, which is fantastic. If we compare the two head sculpts as well, again, night and day is the only way I can describe this, really. The new head sculpt is pretty much pitch perfect to what we see on the page. The original release is a good approximation, but again, put them next to each other, it's like chalk and cheese. They just look so different. One looks absolutely fantastic, and one just looks slightly amateurish by comparison. Likewise, if we look at some of the joints on the original release, they look very unsophisticated by today's standards. Take the wrist, for example. This is a straight swivel, so you can only rotate that fist around. There's no hinge here to be able to move it up and down, so it just looks a little bit clumsy. Likewise, if we look at the knees, obviously they've gone for a ball joint to allow maximum posability, but it just looks really compromised. Like, this looks really ugly, and it's very distracting because the whole flow of the leg just looks really uneven now and broken up and weird, and it just looks quite unsightly. And again, what's really strange is that I hadn't thought about this. When I got the figure initially, I was absolutely super pleased and very impressed that I loved this figure. I had him on display, and I never noticed anything particularly wrong with his proportions. And yet, flash forward all these years later, now that I have this new figure to compare it to, it's like, wow, I can't believe that I missed that in the original release. Okay, so final thoughts from me. In terms of my star rating, I'm going to give it 4 stars. Why is that? Well, I really like this figure. As I said, I think it builds on all the strengths of the previous Immortal Hulk figure, which for me was a 5-star figure. I love the sculpt, I love the paint apps, I love the articulation. There's really an awful lot to love about this figure. It's very comic book accurate. It's perfect in so many ways. So why have I knocked off 1 star for this figure? Well, for me, I feel like they just needed to innovate a little bit more. Just give us something, because this is essentially, it feels like a re-release of a figure that we already own. Now I know, I fully appreciate that it's a different character, it's a different paint scheme, and of course we have a brand new head sculpt, which is all really good stuff. But I think you also have to kind of up it as well and give us something a little bit new, because we're paying for the same thing essentially twice. So I really wish they'd give us some different accessories, an alternate head sculpt so we had two heads to choose between, maybe some different kind of hands this time around, or as I said, maybe an accessory like that big chunky gun or whatever, something, maybe even a display stand, because the original figure didn't, the Immortal Hulk figure didn't come with that, so maybe there's something they could have done there that would have been fun and a little bit different. But as it is, you know, this feels like we're getting a bare bones re-release but with a different paint scheme and a different head sculpt, and whilst it's a really excellent figure, I think if you haven't got one and you're a Red Hulk fan, you're going to want to get this guy. For me, he is probably the best Red Hulk figure ever produced to date so far. But all that being said, I'm just wish they'd just gone that extra mile to just give us something new here. If you enjoyed this video, please do give it a like, and remember to subscribe as there'll be plenty more videos soon.